Support comes from Sunday Morning Cafe, presenting Resilience and Creativity, a concert and interview with Royce Martin, creator of Swag Time, and resilience researcher Dr. Tom Wagner on August 2nd, sundaymorningcafe.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Today we are taking a look at teen curfews recently implemented in St. Louis and across the nation. These curfews are a response to a rash of violence and dangerous behaviors that have come up this summer at various public celebrations, including Pride Weekend and the weekend of Independence Day. A couple of weeks ago, the city of St. Louis put a juvenile curfew in effect for the rest of the summer, that is, until Labor Day, in the downtown and downtown west neighborhoods. It's an additional measure. A year-round curfew for minors already exists for all parts of the city, and these apply to young people who are Gen Z, between 14 and 17 years old, and Gen Alpha, who are up to 13 years of age. St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department's Chief Robert Tracy explained why two parts of downtown, rather than every city neighborhood, have this added youth curfew.
Our biggest worry about downtown and downtown west is compared to the neighborhoods, where the neighborhood has a social construct, where the neighborhoods actually can look out after each other, the guardians, and as I say, parents and guardians sitting on the stoop watching the children. When it comes to downtown, we don't have that. We have kids coming from all over the region, sometimes hundreds coming from Illinois, coming from North County, South County, West County, and even from our city. And when they get together in those groups and they're wandering around with no other activities to do, to run into each other, sometimes conflicts arise, and sometimes they bring fireworks and have firework wars that they had a couple of years ago.
That was Chief Robert Tracy of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. We also heard from Chris Randall Sr. He's a father to a 13-year-old son and a former police officer in St. Louis County, as well as a current coach and mentor at Gentlemen of Vision. Chris noted environmental factors that families and young people are dealing with today that can lead to violence among teens.
We didn't just get here by happenstance. This is, due to the system of the justice system. This is due to the system of matters of food insecurity and public education and activation of youth social skills and fine arts. It is a wealth of things that have come together that has made this stew of violence amongst teens. So I don't believe it's one certain one industry or one sector's responsibility. It is all of our joint failure within the government, within private sector, as far as with how are we feeding, how are we supporting the mental health, the social and academic behaviors of our youth. All of that comes together to create unfortunate opportunity for really bad things to happen.
That was Chris Randall Sr., father to a 13-year-old son. Now, later in the show, we'll talk about resources the city provides to support youth safety. We'll also discuss what's known about the effectiveness of juvenile curfews. But to start things off, let's focus on adolescence as a developmental stage and factors that impact the growth of healthy young people. Joining me in studio to discuss that is Ashley Wilkinson, Clinical Site Supervisor for Provident Behavioral Health. Ashley, welcome back to St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks for having me, Lane.
Ashley, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on the social construct that Chief Tracy mentioned and the environmental factors that Chris Randall Sr. brought up. Mm-hmm. What rises to your mind most immediately?
Yeah. One of the things I appreciate, I think, about both of those comments is the awareness of systems, and that there are multiple factors contributing to this incidence. It is not just adolescent development. It is not just the justice system. It is not just the cultural moment. There is I think he said a stew. It's a stew that's been brewing. So I do think that awareness is really important because it can be really easy to level blame or move into some black and white thinking about what quick fix might help. So I do appreciate that. I think because I'm here to talk about the kids, right, and talk about their brains, and I think I immediately go to, we have that awareness as adults that are functioning with brains no longer under construction in a lot of ways, and that is a perspective that has to be modeled and taught to the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha generations because they don't have the capacity automatically to think about their actions in the context of a system. So immediately we're already having a conversation that you've kind of lost the adolescence because that's not going to be what feels connected to their sense of belonging and their sense of what's important to them in the world. So that's one thing that comes to mind. Yeah.
From your perspective, I mean, are young people these days receiving enough adult support? And, that can be supervision. It could come in the form of mentorship in order to help them sort of with the things that they're dealing with at this point in their development that could prevent, acting out or conduct that could lead to injury or to law breaking?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it depends on who you ask. There's a lot of perspectives. I think a lot of teens would say we're either not getting any or we're getting way too much support and having eyes on us. One of the things we talked about last time was the kind of unique with Gen Z growing up having Gen Alpha millennial parents, but then Gen Z also having more of the digital smartphone generation, and then Alpha was the digital childhood. They've always had eyes on them, whether it's the adults in their lives or the digital technology. So they're used to this feeling of I'm being watched all the time. And so in some sense, their nervous systems are in this like threat response pretty much all the time. And we see a lot of research has shown how anxiety is so very high for adolescents in both Gen Z and Gen Alpha, as well as depression. And a lot of that can come from a nervous system that is chronically in a fight or flight response. I also think that I come from a helping profession, right? So I hear all the time from teachers, from parents, from guardians, social workers, that there's a lot of people. St. Louis is a very resource city. There's a lot of people out there that want to be there to support and are trying in their daily showing up in the classroom, in the therapy room, when they're at home, trying to figure out how do I show up for my teen. So I do think it's not necessarily a lack of showing up, but maybe we just are trying our best to figure out how do we show up in a way that connects with our teens.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about what is going on inside before we kind of move outside again. And, what seems to be most troubling about the violence and dangerous behaviors is how their brains are still very much developing at this stage. What most people hear about is the prefrontal cortex. What is that for those maybe who are not familiar? And how is it still developing during those teen years?
Yeah. So I will warn you, this is a little bit of my nerd is going to come out. So if at any point I need to talk less about this, please interrupt me. Okay. But the prefrontal cortex, to start with that, for those of you, obviously everyone that can't hear me because I'm on the radio, I'm holding my hand up with my thumb across my palm and my fingers wrapped around the outside. The prefrontal cortex is that outside fingers. As a model of the brain, this part of the brain is what is responsible for critical thinking, problem solving, de-escalation, all the things that would be very helpful when you are with a large group of people whose emotions maybe are running on high in the heat of the summer. That is the part of the brain that does not finish construction until about 25. Mm-hmm. So for the 13 to 19 demographic that we're talking about right now, they are all at various stages of that part of the brain still being developed. And so some of the effects of that, I think, are very obviously what we just talked about. It's going to take them longer to think through. They'll be more prone to impulsive behaviors. They also, on the positive side, are very connected to their emotions. And we've seen this with Gen Z, especially. Gen Alpha, I anticipate it will be the same as they get older. But Gen Z is, as a generation, kind of known for knowing how they feel and expressing it, which is something that previous generations really struggled with. So there's definitely pros and cons to that stage of development. The other piece that's involved during that brain construction phase is that they are developmentally seeking autonomy and trying to figure out who am I and how do I belong in the world? How do I relate to other people? So all of that is also happening as they're starting to form their identity in the context of the culture and systems that they have grown up in, and also as an individual in those systems.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the factors that can hinder proper development of the prefrontal cortex?
Yeah, for sure. This is where, as a therapist, my brain's I'm going to first go to, their negligence and abuse, so types of trauma, definitely serve as almost like freezes on certain parts of development, and can definitely prolong that construction phase or put some blocks in there. But also resources. If you grew up with food scarcity, with high levels of crime in your neighborhood, those are other things that can definitely we go back to that threat response. Your system is not going to be concerned with figuring out social norms if it's concerned about where your next meal is going to come from. So that hierarchy of needs also, as you grow, can affect the construction that is happening naturally in your brain through that development.
Mm-hmm. These factors that have to do with brain development, it's neurology. There's also what is happening with puberty.
Mm-hmm. Hormones.
Right. Like all of these factors together, and then the heat, of course, here in St. Louis. Is there anything about the experiences that Gen Z and Gen Alpha now that they are going through that kind of predisposes them to the kinds of behaviors that adults would characterize as reckless?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things that we all have in common is a desire to belong, a longing for connection, right? And I think especially for our teens, Gen Z, Gen Alpha age group, they have that same longing. Now, the way that that's going to be expressed or even understood, the way they make sense of that is going to be impacted by the stage of development, what part of the construction their brain is under at that time, the resources available to them. So I do think in some ways they are primed because of that to seek belonging in ways that adults might think through a little bit longer and make different choices. One thing about Gen Alpha in particular is they are known as the digital childhood, the age of digital childhood. So their norm is connecting with peers via social media, TikTok, Snapchat. It's through a digital platform. That is where most of that bonding and connection happens. So they don't have a ton of practice in their nervous system with being around large groups of people for the purpose of belonging, right? And so I think some of these events that are happening there's a pull, there's a draw to be with other teens, to be with people in physically and not just digitally. And then at the same time you get there, and I would imagine there's a lot of flooding of nervous systems because they're not used to it at that level. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of very naturally what happens in our bodies is if we have that type of flooding, it needs some kind of release or it needs some kind of soothing. And things that feel in the moment very cathartic could also be associated with high-risk behaviors. It can be very cathartic to do something violent because it releases a lot of energy. Right? And while that's effective in the moment, it can have long-term consequences and can affect the people around you. And again, that's asking teens to think about those in-the-moment choices in a way that is they're at a deficit a little bit to think about it that way. So I do think there's a great pull, and then they are set up a little bit to be also pulled towards maybe some of the unhealthy or unsafe ways of trying to regulate amidst almost a mob mentality.
We're talking today with Ashley Wilkinson. She's the clinical site supervisor for Provident Behavioral Health, and we are discussing some of the factors developmentally that go into teen behaviors that are deemed reckless or dangerous and are very much part of teen curfews that have been implemented here locally as well as in other parts of the country. Is there really much of a difference between the things that older generations experienced in their adolescence and what is happening now?
Yes and no, right? I'm going to give the annoying answer. I think in a lot of ways, there are a lot of commonalities. We all went through this phase of development. All of us have experienced this time. However, that stage of development is happening in a very unique culture, context, moment, and time that cannot be repeated. Just like my experience of being a teenager existed in a context, in a system that is different from what my kids will grow up in. So I think it's a both and there.
So Ashley, from your understanding of existing research, how effective are these kinds of structures for teens?
I really want to highlight the word you said of structure, because I think this is kind of a hot topic, hot button between a lot of adults about how do we provide supportive structure to our kids, to our teens. And people, we are creatures of extremes. We like to pendulum swing, right? So I would say for me growing up, I was a 90s kid. I think a lot of us as millennials would say we had the pendulum swing of a lot of freedom when we were growing up and a lack of supervision, if we're going to say it maybe in a little more of a negative tone. And then there was a lot of pendulum swing to the other side with helicopter parenting and I want to say it graciously, we wanted eyes on because we experienced eyes off, right? And every generation, going back to what we have in common, every generation grows up with a certain set of experiences, tries to make sense of them, tries to learn from them, and then does something different, right? So that was our experience coming in as millennials coming in. And I do think we're starting to see from Gen Z and Gen Alpha that they are starting to push back towards the other side of the pendulum swing of sometimes with curfews and structures and boundaries that can feel like eyes on, that can feel like you are surveilling me, right? But at the same time, if kids and teens don't have any structures, then there are all the same risks. So the point is to have connection with correction, and one without the other leads to very similar consequences and behaviors. And so I'm hearing the adults in the city and the county wrestling with what kind of structures are going to provide support and safety to our teens, and what kind of support can guardians and teachers and parents and family members give to ensure that connection piece is solid as well. So how you talk to your kids about things like curfews, I think, is really important.
I mean, from your perspective, are curfews likely to change or to influence behavior?
I may let other people speak to that. I don't know much of the statistics around that. My gut says nothing great. At least for me, nothing great happens after 10 p.m. You know, I need to go to bed. Like whether it's a text that I send or an extra episode of a show. I've been obsessed with High Potential. Nothing good happens after 10 p.m. So I do think that there is a rationale behind them. I also think that if I go back to my experience as a teenager, you give me a hard line, and immediately I see that as a challenge.
Let's push it.
Let's push it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So, but at the same time, the way that curfews are structured is there is a consequence for it being pushed. And I do think that for teens, they do need to have experiences in their life where they experience, I pushed a boundary and there was a consequence. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I see both sides right now.
As we close, what would you recommend to parents? How can they talk with their teens about avoiding dangerous behavior or just making better decisions during the summer and in those, particularly in those hours, they're not allowed to be out.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is always a great setup for the conversation is, if possible, try to have it not in the moment that the boundary is being broken. At that point, if you're trying to have this conversation as you're picking up your kid from the detainee center, they're not going to hear anything.
Yeah, that's not good timing.
That's not good timing. That may be exactly when you want to talk about it, but it's not good timing. Nobody's nervous system is prepared to have that land and soak in and actually learn from that. So if possible, to have those conversations with your teen in moments of connection. Because again, going back to the connection correction, if you come in and it's I'm putting my foot down and you need to listen to me and we've lived through this and why are you making these stupid decisions? Shame is it blocks the ears. There's no way that those words will land. At the same time, if I'm only saying, man, when I was your age, I totally get it, I would have broken every single one of these curfews, that's also not going to land super helpfully either. So we want to balance. Having the connection is the foundation for the correction. And one without the other is not going to lead to the behavior changes that we're wanting.
Ashley Wilkinson is a clinical site supervisor at Provident Behavioral Health. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We need to take a quick break. Coming up, a criminologist's perspective on the effectiveness of juvenile curfews. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Today we're spending the hour talking about teen curfews. Just before Independence Day, the city of St. Louis announced it was putting an additional juvenile curfew for 2 downtown neighborhoods in effect through Labor Day. Curfews for minors are not limited to St. Louis, however. According to the nonprofit National Youth Rights Association, more than 400 towns, cities, counties, and states across the U.S. have juvenile curfews in place. This raises an important question. Just how effective are these curfews at curbing crime or dangerous behavior in minors? We want to hear from you. What do you think of teen curfews? Email us at talk@stlpr.org or give us a call at 314-382-8255. 314-382-8255 is that number. We talked to 17-year-old Ruby from Webster Groves about how well she thinks city curfews on teens will work.
I mean, in my perception, you create a hard line, people will find a way to get around it. I think that all the curfew is doing is creating a further barrier for teenagers to exist, and I think it's absolutely realistic for the city and even the county, too, to see teenagers finding ways to avoid being caught or be out, and naturally, I think that'll lead to them doing things that are more unsafe and more dangerous because there's no or some so-called authority figure to administer anything safe, and so I don't think it'll effectively curb dangerous behavior. I think it'll encourage it.
Gabby Moore is the mother of an 18-year-old ready to start college. She's always recognized the importance of keeping young people engaged and safe. Her son is no longer subject to juvenile curfews, but she's not completely sold on city-mandated curfews for minors.
I think there's a fine line when it comes to curfews. Unfortunately, these types of mandates tend to only negatively impact certain demographics. I fear that the enforcement of these mandates by police departments are going to cause issues for these teens, especially in a time where they're in their biggest time of development, right? Where they're going to be making mistakes and learning from them. And so hopefully they'll be met with grace and understanding and maybe even some guidance and not just fines and punishments.
We also heard from 14-year-old Montgomery Price. She's just come back from Japan, where she was struck by cultural difference in how adults and children coexist. There, she saw even very young children walking to and from school without what Americans would consider adult supervision. She believes there are ways to keep young people safe that don't involve curfews.
I think there are several other measures that can be taken to ensure the safety of minors, especially seeing how, like 5-year-olds are walking around in another country by themselves. And everybody is just like, oh, they have the right of way. And, like, they know where they're going. I think that adults should have enough sense to be like, maybe we shouldn't, impose curfews, but impose gun laws. Because those things matter. That is what's hurting us. What's making people want to put curfews in.
Kenya Brumfield-Young is a criminologist and associate professor at St. Louis University. She joins us in studio to discuss what research says about the effectiveness of juvenile curfews and other measures aimed at keeping people safe. Kenya, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We just heard from a teen and a parent about their thoughts on the effectiveness of juvenile curfews. As a criminologist, what are your first reactions to their perspectives?
I think that young people have a very good insight into even what some of the data tells us, is that we have young people who are, who want to belong somewhere. We have young people who want to engage. And while there is structure, if the structure becomes too restrictive, they may look for something or somewhere else to become involved.
Mm-hmm. What does research say, Kenya, about whether teen curfews actually reduce very specifically crime or violence?
Well, one of the largest study was done in kind of the Southish, and it was, I think, 230,000 participants of young people were engaged in that study. There were 85% white kids, there were 13% black kids, and what they found was that the extended curfews were not as effective as they had hoped. Young people had become engaged in behaviors at different times of the day, or they became involved in behaviors in other areas where the curfew was not. Mm-hmm. The other thing that they did find was that there was disproportionate contact of youth of color, and that the enforcement was disproportionately impacted, again, youth of color.
Mm-hmm. What kinds of behavior are we talking about?
Well, when we talk about young people and behavior, I mean, that can be, a range of things. That can be from simply existing to some of the more, chronic or some of the more delinquent acts that we might see, burglaries, robberies, things like that. But when we talk about engaging in curfew, really what we're talking about is youth presence and the way that people feel when they see a large group of young people gathered, whether they feel safe, whether they do not. And this is not a new conversation. The conversation around young people and presence has been going on for decades.
Mm-hmm. When you said success, what did you mean by that? So in other words, from a criminology standpoint and these studies that are done, what factors determine whether any curfew is considered successful or a failure?
Well, I think that's a tricky question, in that the ultimate goal often is to reduce violent behavior, right? And we've had it relegated to young people through this particular conversation. So is success meaning that it's down for a certain period or long term? If we're talking about long term, it is not long term, it's not effective long term according to the data. The data tells us that these extended curfews don't necessarily impact the way that we would like or the way that public may perceive that they do. We would hope that we would be able to look at more, collectivism, collectivist ways to help engage young people into more positive activities. But we have to circle back to just having a presence, right? Because when we're talking about curfew and moving young people out of a space, we're really talking about what their presence implies, and I think we have to look at that through a closer lens.
Mm-hmm. And what about their presence makes people nervous?
Well, I think that as we're in a social media society, and the worst of the worst is typically what makes the rounds very quickly, and we get very inundated with negative images of young people engaged in these large, like, fireworks wars, or engaged, like the Kia boys that were stealing cars, right? So we get inundated with all of these high-profile images of young people behaving poorly, and young people behaving well don't circulate as quickly. And so we have attached, rebellion and violence to youth. And I think when we have these ideas, then when we see these large groups of young people, then an area is perceived or deemed unsafe.
So the new or additional curfew that was placed by the city of St. Louis on July 3rd through Labor Day is for 2 neighborhoods. It's downtown and downtown west. So for kids who are going to get into trouble, I mean, how effective is it to isolate, certain areas for additional strictures like another curfew?
Well, I think when we do that, what we're doing is actually just moving them into another neighborhoods. We're talking about displacement and transference. When we're looking at just 2 neighborhoods like that, we kind of have to say, why is it that it's these 2 neighborhoods? We have a lot of activity in those areas that bring in tourists. We bring in, people who don't live in the St. Louis area to engage in, our St. Louis culture. And moving young people away so the perception is that the area is safer, I think it becomes an issue of optics. I mean, over the 4th of July weekend, there was over 40 young people taken to the reunification center, and we had fewer than 10 of them had fireworks, and we had one person who'd been engaged in petty larceny. So we have to talk about, what does this police contact look like among, young people purely for their presence?
Mm-hmm. As far as metrics go, and this goes back a little bit to that question about success or failure, what are the metrics that you think city leaders should be using in order to determine whether this additional curfew was a good choice?
Well, the additional curfew, when we look at the measurements and what all the things that we need to be looking at, we also have to look at our young people. What else do they have to do? Where else do they have to go? Who are they involved in? And are their voices a part of these decisions? It's not simply about moving young people on. It's about moving them on to what? Something safe, something engaging, something that's maybe even equally as exciting for them. And so I think those are the other conversations that we really need to have, is when we move them on, it's not just moving them on into somebody, into another jurisdiction or to another district for them to, in quotes, I'm using air quotes here,
yes,
deal with them. Mm-hmm. But we also have to look at how we can better engage them.
What are some of the insights that you have gleaned in your time, studying criminology? What is it that youth have to say about curfews themselves? And, so we've heard some of the voices before I introduced you, and also in the first part of the show, we heard from Ashley Wilkinson. What do youth have to say that people are not hearing loudly enough?
Well, prior to coming into academia, I worked in juvenile spaces for over 30 years. So I'm a practitioner and then became into being an educator. And one of the things that I heard often was, there's nothing for us to do. I want to be with my friends. And we have a system now where it used to be young people hung together or engaged each other by block by block. Now we have multiple ways for kids to get together. So we're getting kids together from, anywhere from St. Charles County to St. Louis County to St. Louis City. And they're just like, I want to be with my friends. I want to hang out. I want to have something fun. And the other thing we say, well, we have places where they can go. And sometimes those places cost money. So if we're talking about a cost factor, we have to look again at how do we engage young people who could be underfunded, and to still being able to spend time with their friends in places that are engaging and somewhere they want to be. I think one of the things I heard from them is we adults make an idea or have an idea of what they want to do, where they want to go, and sometimes they're left out of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned access as being one barrier, youth being left out of the decision-making process about things that are offered to them by adults who, ostensibly have the resources in order to make things happen. The kinds of situations that youth are coming from and what happens with a citation, how is that also complicated? And how is this related to how it affects parents and guardians?
Well, when we talk about citing, or in other words, bringing the criminological aspect into curfews, we have young people who, again, due to their sheer presence and being in a place where they shouldn't be, can bring them now into contact with law enforcement where they may not have had law enforcement contact. Citation on parents can be, have a financial burden. Citations on parents can also can put more strain on the relationship between the caregiver, because we keep talking about parents. And I think the thing that we have to remember in this conversation is that many of our young people are not living in homes with biological parents. We have young people who are living with foster parents, family friends, or they're couch surfing. So I think we also have to look at this broader aspect when we're talking about this. But ultimately, when we start, I think, attaching things like citations and those things with parents, I think that we bring in, another level of criminological engagement that can be burdensome to the family.
Mm-hmm. When young people at a point where they're just teens, they're minors, are coming into contact with law enforcement because of a curfew, I mean, what kind of tension then does that create in the relationship between a young person and a law enforcement officer or agency?
Well, that can actually depend largely on the interaction that the young person has, right? If the interaction is relatively positive, then there could be a young person who garners resources that maybe didn't have them before. However, if it's a more contentious engagement, then it could be a lot more volatile. I think those are all things that we have to look at, because sometimes when we tell kids that just have to go home, what is that environment? Is it abusive? Is it neglectful? Is there what's going on in that home that we're sending them back to, because they may feel that outside is safer.
Mm-hmm. How often are summer curfews put in place?
Every summer. It's a conversation amongst major cities just across the country. It's not just St. Louis. It's when juvenile activity ramps up, then the conversation comes around curfew. The public feels very comfortable with the idea of of the curfew and citations and things along those lines. So I think it is, I think the message is efficacious among the public, but it's probably not as efficacious as it aligns with the data.
Mm-hmm. Is there some way to disaggregate data that is out there, that looks at summer curfews versus curfews that exist throughout the rest of the year?
Well, I don't know of any study that has done that, but there would be a way to look at that. But I have not done it, and I have not seen it yet.
Mm-hmm. In the larger picture, Kenya, do you think that there are measures that could take the place of curfews, or ones that could work in tandem with curfews to ensure safety of young people?
I think that if we have a system where young people are engaged and they feel connected, then I think that what we have all year long is reasonable and will move young people into safer spaces. Right? Because when I'm going to go into when I was younger, right, we would go skating,
Sure.
we would do all kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
and then we would go home. We were tired, or we had friends sleep over, or we had those type of things. So I think that we have to come back and look at what has worked, what's working in other areas, and we've got to pull those and have those regional conversations, because it's not just a St. Louis City issue. This is an issue that spans the entire region, because that's where our young people are coming from.
Mm-hmm. And the last question for you for today, because I would love to talk with you again when we are past that Labor Day point. What do you think needs to be done now when it comes to ensuring that that they're safe and they're taken care of?
I think one of the things we do is start planning for next year. We have this conversation every year about our young people, and I think that we start talking about next year, and we look at what has been successful, what has not, and I think we start building this infrastructure for the upcoming year.
Mm-hmm. Kenya Brumfield-Young is a criminologist and an associate professor at St. Louis University. Kenya, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We need to take a quick break. When we return, we'll pick up with today's conversation about juvenile curfews, what they're meant to do, whether they work, and what other approaches could be taken instead. And we want to hear from you. What do you want to see done to engage young people in safe and fun ways? Email us at talk@stlpr.org or give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. Coming up, we'll learn about St. Louis's Office of Violence Prevention efforts to engage teens in the city. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. Today we've been discussing the brain and social development of teens, juvenile curfews, and ways to engage young people and keep them safe. There are several ideas outside city-mandated curfews on how to manage teenage St. Louisans, but many young people feel there aren't enough opportunities to hang out with their peers. 17-year-old Ruby thinks that a sense of community is important for anyone, especially teens, but she feels St. Louis as a whole does not feel welcoming for her and her peers.
I love my city, I love St. Louis, but I can't say that there's really a strong place for community and being, especially with young people. And I think that creating sort of these third spaces, these areas of social infrastructure, like cafes, libraries, like places like the 9 Mile Garden, like these agoras that are beautiful, I don't think that we have enough space for them. And I hope that I can see in the future that St. Louis, which is a beautiful, vibrant community, can invest more time, effort, even money into creating these spaces so that our community can thrive. That's what I hope for.
We also heard from 18-year-old Gabriel from St. Anne. On one hand, Gabriel gets why city leadership put a curfew in place. Still, he questions the duration of the curfew and who's affected.
I think curfews are a positive thing. I think it's overkill if the curfews are like 8. I think if it's like 10, 11, or maybe like 12, that's okay. But after that, I understand that. I think there is a lot of opportunity to socialize as a teen. I feel like the main place to socialize is obviously school, and then where you socialize outside of school is up to you and what type of friends you make and what you do. But if you're like, I feel like it is kind of limited today with the way some of the kids act now. A lot of places are closing early or placing restrictions on teens and not letting them do things, which I think I can understand why, but it's unfair to some teens who haven't done anything wrong.
We've been inviting you to the conversation, and one of those folks is Joe in Mascoutah. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi, thanks for calling.
I just turned on the radio because I was taking a lunch break, and I heard that there was a curfew in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, well, that's crazy, because I used to have issues when I was younger getting busted for breaking my curfew. And on one hand, they work to an extent as far as parents that kind of really keep track of their kids. Like, a lot of times I had to let my parents know where I was at all the time. Mm-hmm. But also, like, when me and my friends would be out, we just enjoyed taking walks because we would be up until 5 or 6 o'clock on Friday and Saturday anyway. And it was nice just walking around outside. It was quiet. We'd walk up to the Denny's like 2 miles down the road. And it was cool. I'm from a bigger city, though. And we got busted one time. And sure enough, they had to call my dad. And then that made it, it seem like we were, being bad and stuff. And it's like, no, we're just walking around. We're not doing drugs or anything. So it does. I feel bad because I just heard from a caller, I guess, the curfew's at 8 o'clock, which is just insane.
Well, thank you
reached
so
that
much,
place.
for calling and sharing about your experience, Joe. In studio today, we have someone who is working with youth in St. Louis. That is Marvin Teer, Director of the Office of Violence Prevention. Marvin, welcome back to the show.
Always a pleasure to be here with you.
So we've heard a lot of perspectives so far today from a clinical psychologist, a criminologist, from teens, and from parents. What are your initial reactions to what folks have had to say so far about curfews, Marvin?
I think everybody is legitimately concerned, but also engaged. There is a perception that there is a large population of teenagers who are out here, engaging in reckless behavior. That can be that perception that there are throngs and throngs of kids who are underage who are doing that. That's not what we're really finding. There are some kids who are out here who are not in a structured environment as much as they should be, but there's the vast majority of the people who are engaging in a lot of that disruption are not teenagers. Once again, we do get a big transient group that comes from other areas. This past holiday, when we did have staffing at the reunification center, I'd say the majority of those kids were from other jurisdictions. We only had about 12 or 13 kids who were from the St. Louis area. The rest were from St. Charles, the county, or over in the Illinois area. But so with that in mind, I don't really think that it is as much of a problem as it is perceived. There is a stigma that teens are burdened with, that they are the cause of the problem, when really it's not as pervasive as it appears.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we heard a number of times had to do with what is available to young people,
Sure.
third spaces, safe spaces. And the Office of Violence Prevention partnered with Matthew Sticky Boys and Girls Club for Independence Day weekend to provide some activities for youth aged 12 through 17. How did that go? Was it well received by teens and their families?
We had a low census because I just didn't think that it was advertised and the word has gotten out. We're partnering with Matthew Dickey's and with the Boys and Girls Club to expand that. And we're in discussions with them now in doing that. But there's so much stuff that's out here already. If you look at, if you look at all of the recreation centers that are out there, they have programming that's out of this world. Karate lessons, basketball, mentoring, tutoring. I mean, there's so much out there. And 9 times out of 10, I think all of those different facilities are open till about 9 o'clock at night. So what we're trying to do is fill that short gap after that 9 o'clock time.
Mm-hmm. Can you remind us, when is the curfew? What time?
So, as I understand it, Friday and Saturday, it's midnight. And on the weekends, during the week from Sunday to Thursday, in the downtown west area, it's 11 o'clock. It's 12 o'clock, though, across the whole citywide.
Right. Now, what is the Office of Violence Prevention working towards currently between now and Labor Day, very quickly?
We're trying to find good, safe spaces that kids can come with their parents bringing them or their guardians bringing them to give them really engaging opportunities just to have a safe and comfortable space to do the things that they like to do.
Mm-hmm. Would you have young people listening? What would you say to them about what your office is offering that maybe would be a surprise? Something to draw them in?
Well, one of the things I think we should do is really engage with those kids to ask them what they want. How do they want it? What do they see, the entertainment things that they would like to do? But we're hoping to do a couple of drop-in parties, like a glow party for kids or a glow art evening that they can do at the nighttime and do it in the evenings.
And are you open to suggestions from youth? And
Absolutely.
If so, how would they reach you?
Well, I know that the mayor does have a youth cabinet, and so any opportunity that we can get, please do call us. We'd love to hear from kids. And in fact, we try to do that every time we have an engagement with those children to see, well, what do you like to do?
Marvin Teer is Director of the Office of Violence Prevention. Marvin, thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to talking with you again.
I look forward to it.
This episode was produced by Maya Norfleet and by Lila Holobashich. Recorded by Danny Wissentowski. Edited by Maya Norfleet.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.